Hello, trumpet players. We got a question this week. Someone was asking for tips for people who are struggling with embouchure change. I think my approach to the embouchure change thing is a little bit different. And the reason being, I went through it myself. And not only did I go through it myself, I also documented everything. And then with that documentation, created a method, and that method is the method that I sell, that everyone's always interested in. Most people don't know that it originated as notes that I took when I was going through my embouchure change. Okay? So that's actually a very important thing, because that gives me a perspective to this stuff that sometimes even the best, most well-intending teachers don't quite have a grasp on, right? I went through that. I know how devastating that can be. So since then, so that was in the mid-'80s, since then I have helped a lot of trumpet players with their embouchure changes, and I also teach something I call an embouchure adjustment. That's kind of sort of like a change, but to me, a change is when the differences are so severe. The difference between where you are and where you want to go is so severe that you can't just do a little bit of something and 2 weeks later you're playing as well as you were, but with the new embouchure. That's not an embouchure change. I consider that an embouchure adjustment. Okay, let's be clear about that, because they're not the same thing. All right. Anyway, let's talk about my 9 tips for doing an embouchure change. Number 1, and this is where you guys, once again, start rolling your eyes. Oh man, he's saying it again. It's like the last 3 of these videos I did. Number 1 was listening, and it's number 1 again. And a lot of you might think, well, how does listening have anything to do with an embouchure change? But I have to remind you, I teach that all of your physical work should be for musical reasons. In step 2 of this, in tip 2, I'm going to talk about some reasons not to do an embouchure change. But right now, let's stress the fact that when you do an embouchure change, it should be for musical reasons. And how are you going to know what those musical reasons are if you're not listening to professional trumpet players? If you don't have a sound model in your head of what you think you need to sound like, you can't do an embouchure change. And if you do an embouchure change in that environment, just arbitrarily, oh, I feel like I want to do an embouchure change, okay, without having a musical reason to do it, you're asking for trouble. Okay, so yes, I believe that just as important in any other thing that we're talking about, the listening is paramount. You've heard me say it before, listening is more important than practicing. You need to spend serious time listening to professional trumpet players. All right, so that's number 1. Number 2, you need to assess your needs. Why are you trying to change your embouchure? What I want to go through real quick is a list of 10 things. Is it 10? No, it's 7. I'm sorry. It's a list of 7 reasons not to change your embouchure. Okay? First reason not to change your embouchure is because it looks bad. If you think your embouchure looks wrong, that is not a reason to change your embouchure. I just watched a video today of a wonderful trumpet player. And if he was somebody's student at some band somewhere, high school band, junior high band, I'm sure the band director would say, "Hey, you need to change your embouchure because his embouchure looks funny." But he plays great. So we're not so concerned about the way it looks, are we? The way your embouchure looks has nothing to do with nothing. Okay? Number two, second reason why you shouldn't change your embouchure, and that is to play the high notes. Now, let's not get this confused with expanding your range. That is a legitimate reason. And maybe it's a gray area between, right? Um, a fine line, people say a fine line between the two, right? Uh, if you are already a halfway decent player and you just want to play high, you don't change your embouchure. Don't change your embouchure just to play high notes. Okay? If you have limitations, that's different. But if you're already halfway decent player, got a good sound, everything else is going well, and you just want to increase your range, that's not how you do it. Okay? All right, next one. If your friends have a different kind of embouchure from you, that's not a reason to get your embouchure changed. Right? If someone, here's number 4. If someone tells you, "Hey, you need an embouchure change," and I remember a student came back from solo ensemble contest one time, and the judge told him in the comments, "You need an embouchure change." First of all, you know what? If you're a judge and you're watching this, that doesn't help anything. Telling somebody they need an embouchure change and having no information attached to that, that doesn't mean anything. When a student comes to me, and for that student, because you can't, turns out this this judge that wrote this was a clarinet player. Nothing against clarinet players, right? It's just, what kind of sense does it make to put "you need an embouchure change" and have no motivation for it whatsoever coming from a clarinet player? You actually mess these kids up in the head when you do that. Okay? But anyway, if a student comes to me and says, "My band director says I need to change my embouchure," then I say, "Why?" If they don't have an answer, I tell them, go to your band director and ask them, "Why do you say I have to get an embouchure change?" Right? Ask them, what is the reason why? But just changing your embouchure because some person somewhere said you need to do an embouchure change, that's not a legitimate reason to do an embouchure change. All right, so that's number 4. Number 5, don't try to change your embouchure because you saw some videos on YouTube. That's not a reason to change your embouchure, right? Some of you guys are trumpet hypochondriacs. You see stuff on YouTube, and so someone will say, ask the question, "How do I get a better tone?" And people will say, "You need to practice more long tones." So someone looks at that and says, "Oh, I must need to practice more long tones." And then someone else will ask a question, "How do you improve this and that?" And they'll say, "Oh, you need to play more out of the Orban book," right? And so these trumpet hypochondriacs, every time they see a problem and a solution, they think they have that problem and that they need to do that solution. Don't do that. Okay? Don't do that. That's trumpet hypochondria, right? Don't do that. When when you see a video like that, it's good for information, right? It's good to have information to help you understand how things work. But that doesn't mean that everything you see on YouTube or read on a website or whatever is something you have to do. You know what? I think the reason sometimes this happens is somehow we believe that there's one way to play and that all the successful players are somehow playing exactly the same way. And that all the same exercises work for all the successful players. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, there is truth to that first statement. There is only one way to play. And that way for you is your way. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Okay? There is only one right way for you to play, and that's your way. But your way is not my way. My way is not your way. All these other players that are successful does not mean you're supposed to play like that. Okay? So don't let YouTube do that to you. Here's another one. Number 6. The 6th reason not to do an embouchure change. Okay? There are people who think that you can shop for embouchures like they are in a catalog. Let me see. Oh, I'd like to try that one. That one has high notes, right? No, 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 no. You don't shop for embouchures, okay? The most important thing to do when you do an embouchure change is to find your most natural embouchure. That's the purpose of an embouchure change. Not to all this other stuff is frivolous. It will take you in the wrong direction. Okay. Number 7 of reasons why you shouldn't change your embouchure. Number 7 is because some famous person said something about embouchure changes. Or because some famous person had a friend who had an embouchure change. Or because some famous person had a dream about an embouchure change. Or because some famous person... You see where I'm getting at? The fact that somebody is famous doesn't mean anything. Okay? Just because somebody is famous, here's the thing. It's kind of sort of like this video I watched the other day. There was a doctor, experienced doctor, giving his view on the coronavirus stuff, right? And the one of the people in the media asked him, are you saying that you're right and the experts, right? How condescending is that? The experts are wrong? And I love his response. He says, those experts you're talking about have been in the ivory tower. They haven't worked with a patient in 40 years. He says, what I'm telling you is what I'm seeing right here, down here in the trenches. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say it that way. Okay? And I'm in the same position. So yes, we have these famous people out there. And yes, what they have to say is valuable. The difference between me and them, when it comes to my students doing an embouchure change, those famous people don't know you. And I don't know you either, right? Unless you're my student. But the famous people don't know you. And most of them are not necessarily teachers and are not careful about the stuff they say. Right? So just because some famous dude somewhere said, oh, embouchure change, you do not bow down to the trumpet, God, and say, well, the trumpet saint says, thou shalt do an embouchure change. You don't just do it like that, okay? So let's look at some reasons why we want to do an embouchure change. You only do embouchure changes for musical reasons. So we were talking, for example, about range a little earlier, right? There's a difference between being an okay player and wanting to extend your range, or being a player that because you have physical limitations, you can't get even a normal trumpet player's range. There's a big difference between those two, okay? So, like when I had my problem, anything past F, top line F, was a struggle, and it stayed a struggle, and no matter what I did, so it's not that I couldn't, quote unquote, get the high C. This is what we're talking about in the 80s, right? No matter what I did, it's not that I couldn't get the high C, it's that what went into that was just all wrong. Okay? So, and my range would not progress no matter what. It didn't matter what I practiced. It didn't matter how much time I spent practicing. So yes, range is a legitimate reason to change your embouchure if the embouchure is preventing you. You see how that's a difference in logic, right? In my case, the range, the embouchure was preventing me from playing higher. The embouchure was preventing me from getting a better sound. The embouchure was preventing me from better flexibility. The embouchure was preventing me from having better endurance. And a whole slew of things, really. That's not the same thing as saying, wow, I'd like to play higher notes. Let me change my embouchure. It's not the same thing. So you need to take inventory of the reasons why are you changing your embouchure. Don't change for superficial, non-musical reasons, okay? Now, number 3, I'm going to recommend any of my physical trumpet pyramid books. Not necessarily the physical trumpet pyramid book itself, which you could do that. I'm not saying don't get that. But what I'm talking about now is either the daily routines or the Chops Express book or um, some of the Trumpet Chops. The difference between Trumpet Chops books and these other two books have all 7 levels in one book. In the Chops books, we have each one is a different level. Right now we have Trumpet Chops Tyro, we have Trumpet Chops Player, the Trumpet Chops Apprentice is about to come out, and then we have the Trumpet Chops Pro. Tyro is E up to E in the staff, Player is up to G above the staff, and Pro is up to high C. The Apprentice one is up to B flat. And so here's the thing about the physical trumpet pyramid books. As I told you earlier, that physical trumpet pyramid structure is something I created during my own embouchure change. It's basically a rebuilding. You're starting over every day. You start just like a beginner would start by doing the lip buzz and moving up through those different exercises. Now, it's sort of like the Paganini quote. Now, this quote I looked for it earlier today, and I can't find it on eBay. I mean, not eBay. What am I saying? On Google. And that's interesting, right? Because when I found that quote, it was before the internet. So there's a quote somewhere about Paganini in some book somewhere, where he says, "Each day I relearn my technique anew." In other words, every day that he practices, he starts over. And that's what the physical trumpet pyramid book does. Well, not the book, but the system, right? And that system is built into the daily routines, it's built into the Chops Express, and it's built into the Chops books, okay? And here's how it works. You start with air first, right? You do make sure your air is solid in the way and we can talk about that later. Then we do lip buzz. Now, the difference between doing the routine as a routine and doing it as a way to make an embouchure change is the routine you would do all of the exercises every day. When you're doing an embouchure change, you don't move on until you've mastered that first exercise. So let's say you've got the air going. Now you're going to do the lip buzz. And you're going to just do that one note at first. Just one note. Until you get it to sound about like that. Now, it's never going to sound like a trumpet, but it should sound steady. What we don't want is... And I'm exaggerating that. It wouldn't look like that, but it would sound like that. We don't want all that bouncing and all that. We want a nice, steady, long tone. Okay? When you have mastered that, and that can take, by the way, that can take 3 days, 4 days, a week, just getting that one first tone. And you don't do that all in 1 hour. You do it when you get up in the morning. You do it 2 or 3 hours later. You do it another 2 or 3 hours later. And you can just keep trying throughout the day to get that buzz to stabilize. And don't let it shake. All right? Then, when you can do that, you go to the next step. Make the note go up and back down again. And you do that over and over again. You're going to get tired at first. Once you get tired, put it away. Come back an hour later, 2 hours later, try it again. You're going to start, when you come back again, you're going to do just the first note by itself, remember? Then you're going to try to change it, and then you're going to keep trying to do that changing note thing until you've mastered that. Then when you mastered so that you can go up and down the scale and stuff like that on the lip buzz, or do the lip buzz that's in the book, right, whichever book you decide to get, then you do the mouthpiece placement exercise. And this is important, right? This is where things get a little frustrating, because you're going to place the mouthpiece on the sustained buzz. And you're going to do it again. I have to kind of move it around because of the mustache. You normally wouldn't move it around like that. And by the way, just as an extra bonus tip, probably don't want to have a mustache if you are trying to make an embouchure change, because that's not something you want to have to deal with trying to get in and out of the mustache, right? Shave it all off for now until you get this going, okay? So yeah, just do that over and again. So once again, let's say this is 3 days later, and you're only now getting to where you're placing the mouthpiece, okay? Go back to the air exercise. Go back to the lip buzz and do some lip buzz exercise. Then each time you sit down to practice, go through that same, this is the physical trumpet pyramid. This is it. You're relearning how to play. It's like you're in beginner band all over again 4 times a day until you make these changes. You're starting all over again every day. That is the physical trumpet pyramid. And the difference between what we're doing now and what you would be doing on a daily basis is now you're only making it to the mouthpiece. And only when you've mastered that mouthpiece placement are you ready to go to the next level. Now, when you put the mouthpiece on there, let me tell you before we go on, it's going to feel like it's in the wrong spot. That's the whole point, right? That is the change. Almost always, the embouchure change is going to feel like the mouthpiece is going to the wrong place. That's the hardest part to get used to. Okay? So don't try to like manipulate anything. That's the whole point of the mouthpiece placement. Is that so? Let me tell you this part. The reason we do the lip buzz is to get the musculature of the face in the right spot. You know, some people will teach you to do an M, right? M. And I don't agree with that because the musculature, maybe the lips are in the right position, but it's the musculature that we're interested in. We want all the right muscles to be tensed in the exact right amounts. And if you do a buzz, it does that. Okay? The next step is to try to acclimate the mouthpiece to that, not the other way around. We don't want the musculature to match the mouthpiece because that's what caused your, most likely, that's what caused your embouchure problems in the first place. Make the embouchure, put the mouthpiece. Make the embouchure, put the mouthpiece. And that also suggests that for now, you want to breathe through your nose because you don't want to have to, at this point. Here's another thing that causes a lot of people to have embouchure problems is when they breathe, they put the horn up and they pull the lips all the way out of the mouthpiece when they breathe. Okay? Inside the mouthpiece, the lips are all stretched out. You can't play like that. The damage you do to your lips, and if you continue to play like that for months or years, the mouthpiece is going to slide down because that's the only way you can get the notes to vibrate is the mouthpiece position slides down, slides down, slides down until you only have that much lip in the top lip in the mouthpiece. So yeah, you want to make the embouchure first. Now, after you've mastered the mouthpiece placement, you want to do that mouthpiece placement again, but do those same exercises again. And then do this. Now, you would do it without talking, obviously, right? Hold one note using that same musculature, that same posture that you were using on the lip buzz. So check it. So the reason why we do the mouthpiece placement before we do the mouthpiece buzz is to make sure that the muscles are all in the right position. Then breathe through your nose. One long note. Then after you can do one long note, same process, right? Okay, you want to go through the same thing where you're going up and down the scale and stuff like that. When you can master that, it's time for the horn. And once again, we do that same process, but now it's on the horn. Make the embouchure. Now, eventually you get to where you don't have to do a buzz to check the embouchure, but if this is new to you, you're not going to really have a feel for that yet. So you make the buzz. And I always do F. F always seems to me to be the ideal note. When we do an embouchure change, even the weakest lips seem to be okay with F. And just like the other stuff, we want to start with just one note. And this is where the daily routines or the Chops Express or the Chop books come in handy because you have material to do this with. Okay, it's already set up in this order. And I'm going to stress once more that the difference between doing this as a routine and doing this as a embouchure change is that each day with the embouchure change, you're working a little bit deeper into the routine. So that's number 3. Basically trying to use the physical trumpet pyramid structure to rebuild your approach to playing trumpet from scratch. It's the same approach I used when I made my embouchure change. It's the same approach I've used for almost every embouchure change I've helped people with since then. And it's been a lot of those. Okay. So that's number 3. Number 4 is tip number 4. Avoid spending too much time in front of the mirror. There's a tendency to, when you're making an embouchure change, become obsessed with what it looks like. Change your obsession. Don't be obsessed with what it looks like, be obsessed with what it sounds like. And then after you get your foot in that door, so to speak, really pay a lot of attention to how it feels. Because you're going to have to try to remember that feel later. Okay? So, number 1 is think about, obsess over, what does it sound like? You know, when I first made my embouchure, when I first made my embouchure change, I went from having, you know, I heard a brass quintet the previous year, and the second trumpet player in the quintet was a TA for the first trumpet player. It was from a group from another university, and I thought, this guy's younger than I am. Oh yeah, the same age as I was, and listen to that sound. Listen to that sound. And that first day when I went to that embouchure change, and I could only do it on F, but when I played that F, I heard that sound. I heard it on the F. And I said, that's it. That's what made me decide to keep going with my experiments, because at the time, that's all it was an experiment. That's what made me decide to keep going, is because just by doing these things different, I had that sound on the F. And I thought, certainly, if I can get it on the F, I can also make it happen on the other notes. So yes, be sound-centric. Don't spend all your time looking in the mirror, you know, trying to see, is it moving that way? Is it moving that way? No, 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 no. And this goes back right to the number 2, because number 2 says, why are you doing this embouchure change? If it's for visual reasons, you're in for a heap of trouble. Okay? Number 5, I teach the 50% rule. It's just as important during the embouchure change, maybe even more important. Basically, this 50% rule says that at least 50% of your practice day should be spent practicing music. And yes, I understand, if you have a weak embouchure, because, okay, so why am I saying weak embouchure? I said that earlier. When you have an embouchure that doesn't rely on the musculature, you end up using other manipulations to get the notes out. Some people twist, some people use pressure, but you're not using the muscles to get the notes to change. And because you're not using those muscles are weak. When you switch to a muscle-based embouchure, those muscles are currently too weak to play the notes. So that's what I mean when we talk about a weak embouchure. The embouchure is weak because you haven't been using those muscles. All right? Now, if you have been using those muscles, just not as much, then the embouchure change is not going to be so much of a big deal for you. But for most students that struggle with this stuff, the reason they struggle is because their muscles were never used before. okay? They play on a completely muscle-less embouchure. So that means you might have a range that only goes up to E. That might be your highest note. That does not mean you don't practice music. If you're like a college student or something, practice some conconia exercises starting on low G. That's not nice. And you know what? Maybe even just improvise it, because I just realized that conconia exercise wasn't going to fit up to E, right? And by the way, I've got like peanuts in my mouth. That's why I had trouble on the note. Okay. So let's say I'm improvising a conconi-like piece in that range that I can play. By the way, don't tongue. Tonguing is later. Don't worry about the tongue. Don't worry about vibrato. Don't worry about anything but the mechanics of playing the note, okay? That stuff is for later. So that was an improvisation based on, I think it's the first of the conconis, but it's one of the conconis, okay? Do stuff like that. Don't divorce yourself completely from the music. You will regret it. This goes back to what I said. All physical work should be for musical reasons. If you don't spend some time playing music, you won't know if you're on the right track. Okay, so don't. A lot of people make that mistake, and it makes it harder to make this change. They think they have to just concentrate on the chops for a while before they go back to the music again. You know what it reminds me of? I remember it was either Sesame Street or the Electric Company. I think it was Sesame Street. They had this cartoon where this guy is fishing and he's catching lots of fish. But then he brings a weed in and he throws the weed behind him, throws it out, pulls in another weed, throws the weed behind him. And when all the weeds are gone out of the pond, he stops catching fish. Well, that's because that's what the fish eat. And that's how I see this music stuff, right? If all you do is practice exercises, and I don't care how desperate you are, the more desperate you are, the bigger the reason to practice music. If all you do is practice exercises, it's just like that cartoon, this guy fishing out of a pond that has no weeds in it. Okay? The fish aren't going to stick around. All right, so that's number 5. Number 6 is plan ahead. I didn't do that. Learn from my mistakes. You know, something I talk about when I talk about embouchures is this no man's land thing. Okay, I meant to talk about it earlier, but let's talk about it now. There is a time period when the old embouchure, you've forgotten how to do that already. The new embouchure isn't good enough for you to play on yet. It's scary. And, you know, you don't want to be going through that right before a concert like what we did. I was going through that when we were working towards being, I was at UTEP. I was first trumpet in the UTEP Wind Ensemble, and we were getting ready for our first TMEA performance. And I had some solos. It was, I think I even, because I'm convinced they thought I was sabotaging the band. Because I didn't tell anybody I was making an embouchure change. I just did it. And that, you know, an embouchure change is going to take you a few months, minimum. If it's in a worst case scenario, it can take almost a year. All right? So don't do this when you're desperate to sound good. All right? Next. So that was number 6, plan ahead. Number 7, don't panic. It's going to take a while, and during that time, you're going to sound awful. Don't try to hurry it along. If you do that, you might as well not do a real embouchure change, because you have the vulnerability. See that time between the two, when you're in no man's land, when the old embouchure doesn't work, the new embouchure isn't good enough to actually play on it. You're vulnerable. You're vulnerable mentally. You're vulnerable physically. And it's quite possible, actually, if you mess up at that time. And what do I mean by mess up? Messing up at that time is basically trying to play higher than you should. Trying to push it farther than you should during the embouchure change, because you're trying to speed it along. If you do that, you might actually end up trading old bad habits for a bunch of new worse habits. Don't do that, okay? So you want to plan, and that said, we're in the middle of a lockdown. I can't think of a better time to do an embouchure change, right? So this is a good time to get this question. If you need an embouchure change, this is the time to get it. All right, next. I said don't panic. Number 8, one range. So the one range book does not help you with the embouchure change itself. What the one range does is give you a strategy, because when you first get through that first routine and you can say, okay, now I can do this, but your embouchure is still weak, and you still don't have the skills to play, as well as you did when you made the change. The one range book helps you. It gives you a strategy to get back the chops that you had before you change your embouchure. And that's very important. Okay? Get those chops without... See, here's the thing about the one range. It's designed specifically so that you keep all those good things you just got from your embouchure change. It's designed for that. Instead of trying to push the range with some other techniques, one range is designed to expand your range so that all that goodness that you got from your embouchure change stays intact. So I seriously recommend the one range book. Now, number 9 is make sure that you have a teacher. It's actually foolish to try to do this without a teacher. Now, I am not advertising myself as that teacher. I do have a couple spots open, but that's not why I'm bringing it up. You need a teacher. It doesn't have to be me. We're actually, I say a couple spots. We've only got a couple spots left. I don't want to teach more than a certain number. I'm not going to tell you what the number is. I don't want to teach more than that. And, and it's kind of inconvenient, right, to take lessons with me, because most of you don't live in Houston, most of you watching this. and it would be Skype. Uh, I'm not saying don't ask. If you really want to take lessons with me, call and we'll see. I do have some openings. You would have to be able to work with me on my times. Okay, I do have some openings. I'm just saying, don't do this alone. You need someone to help coach you through this. Someone who knows what they're doing, not just some guy who just graduated high school last year. Okay, get a real teacher. You know, something I didn't say earlier, there are times when you don't want to, if you're doing an embouchure change, let's say you actually really do need an embouchure change, but let's say hypothetically, you're a junior going into your senior year, and you don't have any intention of playing after you graduate from high school. You're not going to play trumpet after you graduate from high school. In a situation like that, you shouldn't be doing an embouchure change. Make the embouchure that you have work for you until you're finished, because you're going to ruin your whole uh, high school senior year, right? You're going to ruin your senior year by trying to do an embouchure change when, see, embouchure change should be for long term. You're sacrificing now so you can have a better future as a trumpet player. That was supposed to be in the um, earlier part of the video, and I forgot to add it. So anyway, I hope this all makes sense for you. I hope it's helpful. Embouchure change is a serious thing. I don't teach nearly as many embouchure changes as I used to because I started realizing, first of all, just because someone needs it doesn't mean they should get it. Like what I was saying, like if they only have a year left, it doesn't make any sense. There's times when you just wouldn't want to do that. But it's also, ever since I figured out this whole thing about embouchure tweaks and embouchure adjustments, I would much rather help someone with an embouchure adjustment than to have them change their embouchure. Changing an embouchure, it can be devastating and it can be career ending. Okay? Because you do become extremely vulnerable in a whole bunch of different ways. So, that said, be real careful about this stuff. Don't just do this for rash reasons. Okay? All right, so if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. God bless you, and have a great day. Bye.